Okay, here we are again, and this is session number 50. That's, in my mind, that's some kind of a milestone, okay? So, session number 50. We are still in chapter 7. We're moving along. All right, we're in section number 6, which in the text is on page 123. 1, 2, 3. All right. And section number 6 is entitled From Vigilance to Peace. All right. So, although you can love the sonship only as one, you can perceive it as fragmented. It is impossible, however, to see something in part of it that you will not attribute to all of it. That is why attack is never discrete, and why it must be relinquished entirely. If it is not relinquished entirely, it is not relinquished at all. Fear and love make or create, depending on whether the ego or the Holy Spirit begets or inspires them. But they will return to the mind of the thinker, and they will affect his total perception. That includes his concept of God, of his creations, and of his own. He will not appreciate any of them if he regards them fearfully. He will appreciate all of them if he regards them with love. Okay. So Jesus is telling us, as he will over and over again, that it is not love if it doesn't include everyone. All right? If it doesn't include the whole sonship, all right, it is not love. Because it says, although you can love the sonship only as one, okay, you can perceive it as fragmented. Well, we do. All right? That's what we're trying to correct. We do see the sonship as fragmented. We see all these pieces, right? That's what the ego does. It fragments, it separates, all right? It's constantly separating, okay? So, he says, it is impossible, however, to see something in part of the sonship that you will not attribute to all of it. All right? So, I mean, if you think this person is terrible because of this thing, then he says, look, that applies to the whole sonship as far as you're concerned. You know, there's terrible people out there. Some things are terrible. In other words, he's telling us, Ken would say, it's an all or nothing thought system. Okay? It's either you're in the ego or you're in the right mind. Okay? We seem to be straddling, you know, we seem to have our foot in two different canoes here, but sooner or later you see that you're, you know, that's the way it seems to us. Let's just put it that way. Okay? So what he says we need to do is relinquish attack. And attack is a word that we use often. You've heard it enough times in the course already. You know, attack is I see you as separate. Now and there's differences. You're different than me. I judge those differences. And now I have to defend myself against that. Just seeing you as separate, Jesus would consider that an attack. Right? I see myself as separate from God. Jesus will call that an attack on God. All right? And so you get used to these words, okay? So He says that's why attack is never discrete. All right? You can't just see it in one place. It's an attack on the entire sonship. Right? You know, this person is outside the kingdom. This person is incapable of being loved. All right? He says that's an attack on the whole kingdom, because then you're saying that there's orders of difficulty, that there's all different people and we're all separate. There's only the oneness, and that's the only way you can truly love, is including everyone. All right? And he says, look, this idea of attack has to be relinquished. Right? So the idea that I can separate from God, I can leave the mind of God. All right? He says, you have to let that thought go. You have to put it down. Walk away from it, okay? It must be relinquished. And if it is not relinquished entirely, it's not relinquished at all, okay? You can't say, well, I love everyone, you know, but I'm still working on a few of these people over here, right? Or, you know, you already have, as Jesus would say in one part of the book, one exercise, you've already got somebody in mind who gets left out, okay? So those are the things we need to work on, all right? When you find yourself separating, judging, attacking, okay? You ask, help me to see this correctly. That's how you relinquish, all right? That's how you relinquish the ego thought system and the idea of attack. Right? So he says, if it's not relinquished entirely, it's not relinquished at all. So then he says, fear and love make or create. All right? Fear makes things. All right? Love creates. And in the way the Course uses the word create, love extends itself and creates more love. It's infinite. There's no space. There's nothing to contain it. Right? But when we're in the ego, which is the thought system of sin, guilt, and fear, we make things. Okay? We make the universe. Okay? The mind is very powerful. We really don't have a grasp on that, on how powerful it really is. You know, I don't know, for some reason Stephen Hawking is coming to my mind, and he was talking about just an aspect of mind, and he said that the young girl who was imagining it, that she was dating, you know, some star in a boy band or something. He said in some parallel universe, for lack of a better word, that's happening. Okay? Something to think about, or not. Okay? But that's what happens. That's how powerful the mind is. So we make things out of fear. All right? The fear of reprisal from God, first of all. So we made the universe so we could hide. And then we made other people so that we could point the finger at them and say, no, it's them, it's not me. All right? I didn't do it. Okay? So he says these things have to be given up. He says fear and love make or create, depending on whether the ego or the Holy Spirit begets or inspires them. He says, but they will return to the mind of the thinker, and they will affect his total perception. Okay? And that includes his concept of God. All right? Your concept of God and God's creations and your own creations. It's going to affect the whole thing. So that original thought of, I can leave the mind of God, as we say, one problem. And that one problem looks like gazillions of problems, right? Because it comes back to the mind And we see through that idea, right? And we look at it affects your total perception, he says, and that includes your concept of God. When I believe I could separate from God, now all of a sudden I think of God, my concept of God is that he's going to get me. He becomes a punishing God, right? Stomping through the garden looking for me, right? And, you know, when he catches me, he's telling me, you know, you stay out of here, all right? Go live in pain. Okay, that's the ego's concept of God because it entertained that fearful idea, all right? And then it makes up this entire world, the universe, all right? And all the levels of world that there are, okay? I mean, you don't have to get into parallel universes. It's just one of the things that sometimes cross my mind. I'm glad I have a few friends I can talk to about it. Okay then, let's get serious here. All right? He says, but these ideas of fear and love, they will come back to your mind and they'll affect your perception of things. And that includes your concept of God and of God's creations and of your own creations. All right? You will not appreciate any of them. Well, he, which is the Son of God, he's talking about here, he will not appreciate any of them if he regards them fearfully. Right? You won't appreciate anything if you regard it fearfully. Right? You will appreciate everything, all of God's creations, which is the extensions of love. Right? You will appreciate all of it if you regard things with love. Right? And that's the way when, in the book, when Jesus talks about the gradual awakening, he says you don't shake a child, abruptly wake him up out of a nightmare. He says a good parent eases the child out of the nightmare. And that's how he describes our awakening. He says first you awaken to a different perception. Right? You're perceiving things through the idea of love. Right? And that's what Jesus will refer to as the happy dream. Because we will still be in form, but our perception of things will be changed because we're now seeing things through the concept of love, through the eyes of love, so to speak. All right? And that changes everything. Okay? You know, take for example the question that was put to Krishnamurti. You know, what's your secret? Because he had been recognized as a great spiritual teacher. Right? And people say, what's your secret? What's your secret? And he says, my secret is that I'm okay with whatever happens. Okay? That's part of the happy dream. You're still here, but there's an understanding. Your perception has changed. Your interpretation of things has changed. And you can look on things lovingly. And as Jesus would say, you look on things like as the Holy Spirit would do. There's only two things it could be. It's either a call for love or an extension of love. And when people are acting naughty and vicious and frightening, he says that they're coming from the idea that they're lacking love. They've separated from love. They're calling out for the love they think is missing. Okay? And that's what we do. You know? You're stuck in traffic, you get, frustrated, you start teaching your wife new words. That's what Jean says to my sisters right now. How was the drive? Oh, it was very good. I didn't learn any new words. All So we're not acting like a nut. We're not acting from the idea that I'm separated from love. Because if I was sitting and driving, realizing that I was a thought in the mind of God, everything would be okay. All right? So, paragraph 2. The mind that attacks, the mind that accepts attack, cannot love. That is because it believes it can destroy love, and therefore does not understand what love is. If it does not understand what love is, it cannot perceive itself as loving. This loses the awareness of being, induces feelings of unreality, and results in utter confusion. Your thinking has done this because of its power. But your thinking can also save you from this because its power is not of your making. Your ability to direct your thinking as you choose is part of its power. If you do not believe you can do this, you have denied the power of your thought and thus rendered it powerless in your belief. All right? This is reinforcing what we were just saying. All right? It's a total system, one or the other, right? It's all or nothing. And the mind that accepts attack, all right, the mind that accepts the belief that I could leave the mind of God, right, he says that mind can't love. It doesn't know what love is, right, because it believes it can destroy love. It believes, oh, I left the oneness, I destroyed love, all right? So he says you can't, and coming from that belief, you can't love because you don't know what it is, right? You don't understand what love is. And if it doesn't understand what love is, it cannot perceive itself as loving, all right? So if you think you've attacked love, you've left love, he says you don't understand what love is, and it's impossible for you to see yourself as loving, which is what you are. That's your true essence, all right, is a thought of love that is extending, all right, into the vast infinity, all right. That's your true essence, all right. But if you think otherwise, then you will never be able to see yourself truly. Not never. But you don't see yourself truly at this point, okay? Because sooner or later you will see yourself truly, all right? You will wake up, all right? So, if the mind does not understand what love is, it cannot perceive itself as loving. And this is it. This loses the awareness of being. So if you can't perceive yourself as loving, you have lost the awareness of your being. All right? And that, in turn, induces feelings of unreality and results in utter confusion. All right? And Jesus will reiterate that by saying, you roam the earth uncertain, lonely, and in constant fear. Okay? Being in an unreal place. Wow, what's going on? All right? And utter confusion. Your thinking has done this. All right? My thinking that I could leave the oneness, my thinking that I can leave the mind of God and become something other than I am, right? Losing the awareness of my reality, all right? Because of the power of my mind, here we are, believing it, right? This loses the awareness of being, induces feelings of unreality, and utter confusion. Your thinking has done this because of its power. But your thinking can also save you from this because its power is not of your making. All right? The original source, God, right? We use the term God in the Course. All right? And if you have a lot of baggage with that, then just try to work that out. All right? But in the Course, we use the term God, extended himself. And there's the masculine pronouns that people trip over too, but it's just the language of the Course, don't worry about it. God extended himself, and there you are. You're part of the extension of God. All right? That's your being. All right? And you're part of the mind of God. So your mind is no less powerful than God's. Your mind is no less powerful than God's. All right? And because of its power, when you think you left the oneness, big bang, here we are. All right? That's how powerful the mind is. It created this dream. All right? Which seems very, very real because we created a body that has senses, can sense things. Okay. But your mind is very powerful, and so it can correct all this. Okay? It can correct all this because you didn't make the mind. You didn't make the power that goes with that mind. All right? You can connect with it and use it to correct all this mishigash, all right? And to perceive things through the eyes of love, all right? And keep on going until it's perfectly fine to just let the whole thing disappear, all right? With a little giggle. So he says your ability to direct your thinking as you choose is part of its power. Okay? So you could choose the ego or the Holy Spirit. And when you choose either one of those, the power gets transferred, gets connected to that part that you're choosing. Right? So and then he says, if you don't believe you could do this, you've denied the power of your own thought. And thus rendered it powerless in your belief. So if you don't think you could do that, you're telling yourself that you're powerless. You have become the innocent victim of the world. I don't have any control over that. Right? You don't have control over the comings and goings of people, but what you have control over is your perception, your interpretation of what's happening. All right? You have the power to get to the point that says, I'm okay. I'm okay with whatever happens. All right? Because you are resting in the right mind, which affords us a certainty of invulnerability, a certainty of happiness, a certainty of joy. All right? And so you're okay with whatever happens until you no longer need to be a carrier of the message. All right? And then you can rejoin your Father. All right? You can go back to the mind of God. All right? So, and if you don't believe you could do this, you have denied the power of your thought and thus rendered it powerless in your belief. Right? Because your mind is not powerless, but you believe it is. Paragraph 3. The ingeniousness of the ego to preserve itself is enormous, but it stems from the very power of the mind the ego denies. Right? This means that the ego attacks what is preserving it. which must result in extreme anxiety. This is why the ego never recognizes what it is doing. It is perfectly logical, but clearly insane. Right? The ego draws upon the one source that is totally inimical to its existence for its existence. All right? Fearful of perceiving the power of this source, it is forced to depreciate it. This threatens its own existence, a state which it finds intolerable. Remaining logical but still insane, the ego resolves this completely insane dilemma in a completely insane way. It does not perceive its existence as threatened by projecting the threat onto you, okay? And perceiving your being as non-existent. This ensures its continuance if you side with it by guaranteeing that you will not know your own safety. All right? So the ego is crazy, all right? And it has to rely on the mind, but it keeps denying in the wrong mind. It keeps telling us, don't go there. Right? You know, you're powerless, right? You can't do anything about it, right? And it has this anxiety. It always feels like it's going to be abolished, all right? It's going to be done away with, all right? So what Jesus is saying is it puts that anxiety on your body, on you, right? On you believing you're a separated entity. You align yourself with the ego, but then the ego tells you, okay, yeah, you're separated, yes, but you're going to die, right? God's going to get you. Something's going to get you, right? You're very vulnerable, right? That's what he means by the whole thought system is insane, but that's what the ego thought system does. The ego thought system is the thought of separation. It wants to remain viable, right? But it has to do all these somersaults to remain viable. And it's doing a good job, right? Jesus told hell, do not underestimate the power of the ego, right? Ego will take this book and you'll truly believe that, you know, Jesus says, it's okay to do this, all right? Or Jesus says that these people are terrible, all right? And that's just the power of the ego, twisting things, all right? That's why we need to make that habit, make it a habit, seriously, of stopping every now and then. Just saying, I want to see correctly. All right? There's 365 lessons, but Ken would say, you know, a couple of the lessons, he goes, that's all you need. And he's basically jesting, but he says, one of the important lessons is, I could see peace instead of this. Okay? This is a powerful lesson. He said, if we could stop during the day and remind ourselves, I could see peace instead of what I'm seeing. All right? I could see peace instead of how I'm interpreting the situation. Okay? There's major gridlock all over Manhattan, right? Especially in Midtown, but it spreads out a little further than what they call Midtown, because of the United Nations General Assembly, okay? And there's a lot of, you know, bigwigs in town, right? The big kahunas are here. And so the police have to protect everyone and protect the city. So They even stop you from crossing the street at certain points. And they tell you, you gotta wait, you just have to wait. There's no excuses. I mean, all right, believe me, they're not crazy people. If you, in a medical emergency, they'll move you to safety, believe me. But for the common pedestrian, you're gonna wait, all right? But my hotel is right around the corner, or my boss told me to meet him. And the guy goes, like, you gotta wait, And so my ego, if I'm in my ego, my perception, this is my point really, my perception of that can go two ways, You can get really upset, you can get afraid, you can get angry, or you can go to the right mind and ask, how do I see this correctly? How can I see this peacefully? Right? How can I be peaceful in the midst of this? I can see peace instead of this, instead of what I'm seeing. Right? That's the lesson. I can see peace. And Jesus is telling us that your mind is so powerful that whichever way you choose, that's what you're going to experience. If you truly desire peace, you will experience it. All right? And, the Course always says it speaks to you in a language you can understand. All right? You will experience the peace, or you will experience the guilt and the fear and the conflict and all that, the anger, the anxiety. All righty then. Let's get out of the gridlock here. All right. The ego in paragraph 4, the ego cannot afford to know anything. Right? Knowledge is total. And the ego does not believe in totality. Right? This unbelief is its origin. And while the ego does not love you, it is faithful to its own antecedents, begetting as it was begotten. Mind always reproduces as it was produced. Produced by fear, the ego reproduces fear. This is its allegiance, and this allegiance makes it treacherous to love, because you are love. Love is your power, which the ego must deny. It must also deny everything this power gives you, because it gives you everything. No one who has everything wants the ego. All right? Its own maker, then, does not want it. Rejection is therefore the only decision the ego could possibly encounter, if the mind that made it knew itself. And if it recognized any part of the sonship, it would know itself. All right? This is Jesus bringing us along, telling us what the ego is going to be up to for the rest of our lives. All right? So he says the ego can't afford to know what totality is. Doesn't want to know that, because it's not about that. All right? The awareness of totality erases the possibility of separation, of fragmentation, of different pieces. If there's only totality, there are no different pieces. Therefore, there's no ego. So the ego doesn't want to know anything. All right? It does not believe in totality. And this belief is its origin. All right? What he calls this unbelief is its origin. All right? And while the ego does not love you, it is faithful to its own antecedents, begetting as it was begotten. So it continues to separate, continues to separate. It was begotten by the thought of separation, and it continues to separate. Okay? The image that always comes up for me, and it's coming up for me right now, is the idea of conception. All right? Now, I'm not saying anything is bad, believe me. It's just the way it is. But two cells meet, and what happens? They start separating. They start separating. Right? Until you get something like this. All right? It's just an example of how things separate. That's all. You know. And take the idea of weeds. And my wonderful wife says a weed is just a flower or a plant that you don't want. All right? But they spread. All right? Even lovely bamboo, which is lovely to look at. And they're amazing, the bamboo forests. But if any of you have ever planted bamboo in a place where you live, you know what I'm talking about. That stuff just continues to separate. And it pops up all over the place. All right? And you better watch out for the pipes in your house. But that's the ego. It was begotten by separation, and it continues to separate. All right? I'm in a talkative mood today. All right. So mind always reproduces as it was produced. Produced by fear, it reproduces fear. All right? This is its allegiance. All right? And this allegiance makes it treacherous to you, who are love. Right? You are love. You're not separation. All right? So the thought of separation is treasonous. It's treacherous to you. All right? It wants to take you out of that thought of oneness. Okay? Because love is, you are love. That's your essence. All right? Love is your power, which the ego must deny. All right? That was the original problem. One problem. The ego denied its association with love and continued to separate. Okay? So love is your power, which the ego must deny. It must also deny everything this power gives you, because the power of love gives you everything. Right? There's no lack. Just contemplate that. In the right mind, in the connection with who you really are, there is no lack. Nothing is missing. All right? So the ego has to deny that. Okay? Because he says, no one who has everything, if you realize that you are and have everything, why would you go back to the ego thought system of separation, judgment, sin, guilt, fear, conflict, confusion, anxiety? When you have everything, you're not lacking a thing. Why would you go back there? Okay? So he says here, its own maker, the ego's own maker, doesn't want it. Right? Rejection is therefore the only decision the ego could possibly encounter if the mind that made it knew itself. So this is what he's going to keep telling us. The ego now is bent on keeping you from knowing yourself, in other words. All right? The ego is afraid of you going to the right mind and remembering who you are. Because once you remember who you are, you don't want the ego. You don't want the ego. All right? It's like walking around with dirty, smelly clothes on. And then all of a sudden, somebody hands you brand new clothes and a shower and everything. And you take a shower, you put those clothes on. Wow, this feels great. Somebody says, hey, you want to wear these clothes? No, I don't want to wear those clothes again. So those who know they have everything, why would they choose the ego? So the ego is hell-bent, so to speak, on preventing you from remembering who you are. Okay? And you'll see in your daily life, all the things that keep us distracted from going to the right mind. All right? You know, even if you're a person who's, I mean, eventually everyone's going to wake up, okay? Don't worry about it. But say you're a person who considers himself on a path to awareness, enlightenment, or spirituality. All right? You'll see. All right, you make a plan. Okay, now in the morning I'm going to spend a certain amount of time meditating. I'm going to, reach the awareness of this moment, this present moment, which is all that ever is. All right, or however you like to see it. I'm going to spend time in that quiet place in my mind. That's the plan. All right? And as John Lennon would say, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. All of a sudden, I got to do this, I got to do that. I just remembered I need to do this and that. Before I can sit down and relax, I have to have coffee. I got to make a phone call. The kids need to go to school. The bus was late, and this and that. Right? As the poet said, the world is too much with us, now and soon. Okay? And there it is. That's the ego thought system is interceding. It's bringing us, trying to bring us out of the mind. All right? Not realizing that no matter what we have to do, right? I have to take the kids to school. I got to make a cup of coffee. I got to make a phone call. No matter what we're doing, we can be in the right mind. I can be coming from that foundation of awareness and peace and do what I have to do. Okay? That's the beauty of moving through the dream right-mindedly. All right? Being that lucid dreamer, so to speak. All right? You don't need any formal movements, any rituals. Okay? So he says that, ultimately rejection is the only decision the ego can possibly encounter. All right? And it will encounter rejection when the mind that made the ego recognizes itself, when it knows itself again, when it remembers who it really is. All right? The ego will be rejected. All right? And then Jesus says, in your daily life, if you recognized any part of the sonship, you would know yourself. All right? And in other words, if you recognized any part of the concept of oneness, right, you would know yourself. Okay? When you realize that people that are walking down the street, hurrying by in all kinds of modes of transportation these days, they all have the same need to awaken from this idea that I'm separated from God. All right? That's a place to start, to recognize the sonship, to recognize the oneness of creation. That's the way to start to remember yourself, for the mind to know itself. Okay? So, paragraph 5. The ego, therefore, opposes all appreciation, all recognition, all sane perception, and all knowledge. It perceives their threat as total, because it senses that all commitments the mind makes are total. Forced, therefore, to detach itself from you, it is willing to attach itself to anything else. But there is nothing else. The mind can, however, make up illusions, and if it does so, it will believe in them, because that is how it made them. Okay? All right? So, the ego has to oppose all the knowledge, and any appreciation of the oneness. All right? So it creates distraction. All right? It's willing to attach itself to anything. All right? He says the mind, however, can make up illusions. And if it does so, it will believe in them. So the mind that we have, it has done it. It's made up this whole universe, and it believes we're here. All right? It made up this illusion, and it believes it. Okay? And if it does so, it will believe in them, because that is how it made them. All right? I made up these illusions by believing I was separate. All right? And we can undo all this. Okay? And ironically enough, next paragraph, Jesus says, the Holy Spirit undoes illusions without attacking them, because he cannot perceive them at all. Okay? Talking. Dry mouth. The Holy Spirit undoes illusions without attacking them, because he cannot perceive them at all. They therefore do not exist for him. Right? He resolves the apparent conflict they engender by perceiving conflict as meaningless. I have said before that the Holy Spirit perceives the conflict exactly as it is, and it is meaningless. The Holy Spirit does not want you to understand the conflict. He wants you to realize that because the conflict is meaningless, it is not understandable. As I have said already, understanding brings appreciation, and appreciation brings love. Nothing else can be understood, because nothing else is real, and therefore nothing else has meaning. Right? He's telling us you don't have to go around, you don't have to understand. Okay? You don't need to. It's just because it's all meaningless. All right? So the Holy Spirit doesn't want you to understand conflict. He wants you to realize that because conflict is meaningless, it is not understandable. All right? Now I can hear Ken saying, be normal. Okay? It doesn't mean you go around denying everything now. Oh, that's not real, that's an illusion. That's meaningless. Okay? You know? That rash on your arm is meaningless. It's an illusion. I would say be normal. Start where you are. You know what I mean? If you have a rash, go to the doctor. Okay? But you ask, how can I see these things correctly? How can I see these things through the eyes of peace? That's how we undo the ego thought system. We don't just deny it, all right? And consider, announce ourselves as being enlightened. Right? Oh, I've renounced the ego. Right? As Ken would say, early on, he met people at when he would go to talk about the Course of Miracles, he would meet people that said, "Oh, Course of Miracles, I did that last year." Right? So you don't just deny the ego and announce to the world or to yourself that you're enlightened now. All right? Because as Ram Dass would say, if you think you're enlightened, spend a weekend with your parents. There you go. Or for you older folk with your, your family or friends or whatever. All right? So the Holy Spirit undoes illusions without attacking them. All right? It just shines the light on it and shows you it's meaningless. It's meaningless because when we're sitting with, so to speak, with the Holy Spirit, with the memory of who you are, and what you really are, you notice everything it's got no impact. It's meaningless. All right? And we get to the point where we can eventually just let it go, let all perception go. All right? So, as I have said already, understanding brings appreciation. All right? Understanding who you are. All right? That brings appreciation for being a creation of God. And then that appreciation brings the knowledge of love. Okay? And there is nothing else, he says. There is nothing else. All right. Paragraph 7, if you will keep in mind what the Holy Spirit offers you, you cannot be vigilant for anything but God and his kingdom. But the only reason you may find this hard to accept is because you may still think there is something else. Belief does not require vigilance unless it is conflicted. If it is, there are conflicting components within it that have led to a state of war, and vigilance has therefore become essential. Vigilance has no place in peace. It is necessary against the beliefs that are not true, and would never be called upon by the Holy Spirit if you had not believed them, if you had not believed the untrue. When you believe something, you have made it true for you. When you believe what God does not know, your thought seems to contradict his, and this makes it appear as if you are attacking him. All right? I mean, even as I'm reading that, I would, gently suggest that you read these things over and over. All right? Because you read a paragraph or even sentences like this, he says, what you believe, he says, God does not know. Right? What? I believe I'm Kevin Pratt. I'm living here in this world. All right? It's 2019. All right? He says, no, what you believe God doesn't know. All right? When you believe what God does not know, your thought seems to contradict his. Right? What? You're contradicting his thought. And this makes it appear as if you're attacking him. Right? What do you mean there's no world, there's no Kevin Pratt? What do you mean? It seems like I'm attacking him. Okay? Because I'm afraid to let go of those illusions. And you let go of them little by little, okay? All right? There's a wonderful little quote that I recently read that advancement, so to speak, on the spiritual path is it's like walking in a fog. Little by little, that fog is attaching itself to you. Little by little, you're becoming very wet, right? And you can't brush it off. You're still walking in the fog. It just reappears, right? And he says that's how your spiritual path is. You you acquire it more and more. You let it attach to you more and more. Okay? So, but he says, be vigilant, because when you think that you're separated from God, now it feels like you're at war. All right? So you have to be vigilant for when the ego is pulling you back. Okay? All right? Even if it's in retrospect, in the beginning, sometime after the argument, you're going, oh my goodness, I wish I didn't do that. Or you realize after the argument that you don't feel peaceful, that you got triggered somehow. As Gene would say, you took the bait. And little by little, we work on that. We go to our right mind and keep asking, help me to see this correctly. And to look on these things without judging ourselves, saying, help me to see myself correctly. All right, little by little, you make steps that you're not even aware of. Okay? But he says that's the vigilance. And that's the section here is From Vigilance to Peace. You just be vigilant for when the ego is trying to pull you into that detour into fear, as Jesus would say. All right. Paragraph 8. I have repeatedly emphasized that the ego does not believe it can attack, Okay. It's a metaphysical slip here. I have repeatedly emphasized that the ego does believe it can attack God and tries to persuade you that you have done this. If the mind cannot attack, the ego proceeds perfectly logically to the belief that you must be a body. All right? By not seeing you as you are, it can see itself as it wants to be. Aware of its weakness, the ego wants your allegiance, but not as you really are. Right? The ego therefore wants to engage your mind in its own delusional system, because otherwise the light of your understanding would dispel it. It wants no part of truth, because the ego itself is not true. If truth is total, the untrue cannot exist. Commitment to either must be total. They cannot coexist in your mind without splitting it. If they cannot coexist in peace, and if you want peace, you must give up the idea of conflict entirely, and for all time. This requires vigilance only as long as you do not recognize what is true. While you believe that two totally contradictory thought systems share truth, your need for vigilance is apparent. All right? So, as long as you're still engaged in the idea that I'm here, this is solid, this is true, all right? And oh yes, at times I realize the connection with God is the truth. Okay? So he says, but your commitment has to be total. Otherwise, you have to be vigilant. All right? All right? Otherwise, you have to be vigilant. It requires vigilance only as long as you do not recognize what is true. While you believe that two totally contradictory thought systems share the truth, your need for vigilance is apparent. So while you believe in both possibilities here, you have to be vigilant for when you're straying totally into the ego thought system. And with practice, you get to feel that. With practice, like I say, even if it's in retrospect, after you blew up that, whatever it is you blew up, And then you think, oh, whoa, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I hate the way I feel about that. You know. In retrospect, then you come, help me to see this, help me to see myself correctly. All right? Get yourself back on the path. All right? And then you, all of a sudden, before you get the urge, or before you blow something up, you become aware of the urge. You become aware that you've moved out of a peaceful existence. You moved out of peace. And now the ego is looking to land on something. All right? This is the guilty party. This is the thing that's upsetting me. This is what needs to be eliminated, all that nonsense. All right? But with practice, you start to become aware of that shift of, I just shifted out of peace. Okay? Like the martial art masters who can sense the changes in energy. All right? You change that shift in peace, and you then have a choice. Do I want to go back, or do I want to engage in a conflict? All right? Your mind, in paragraph 9, your mind is dividing its allegiance between two kingdoms, and you are totally committed to neither. Your identification with the kingdom is totally beyond question except by you when you are thinking insanely. What you are is not established by your perception and is not influenced by it at all. Perceived problems in identification at any level are not problems of fact. They are problems of understanding, since their presence implies a belief that what you are is up to you to decide. The ego believes this totally, being fully committed to it. It is not true. The ego, therefore, is totally committed to untruth, perceiving in total contradiction to the Holy Spirit and to the knowledge of God. What you are is not established by your perception. What you are was established by God. You are love. All right? And even using a term, we begin to limit our reality. All right? It's, you are everything. You are everything. Okay? And he says, and that's not up to you to decide. Right? That was decided for you when God extended himself. And you were that. All right? So that's not up to you to decide. Oh, I am a being of love. I am and I have love. Or, oh no, I'm this, I'm separated. He says, no, your true being is not up to you to decide. All right? All right. What you are is not established by your perception, and it's not influenced by it at all. So no matter what kind of nutty stuff you do in the world, it doesn't influence who you truly are. So, paragraph 10. You can be perceived with meaning only by what the Holy Spirit, you can be perceived with meaning only by the Holy Spirit, because your being is the knowledge of God. Any belief you accept apart from this will obscure God's voice in you, and will therefore obscure God to you. Unless you perceive his creation truly, you cannot know the Creator, since God and his creations are not separate. The oneness of the Creator and the creation is your wholeness. your sanity, and your limitless power. All right? This limitless power is God's gift to you because it is what you are. If you dissociate your mind from it, you are perceiving the most powerful force in the universe as if it were weak, because you do not believe you're part of it. All right? He keeps saying it over and over again, as he does. Right? If you don't believe it, if you dissociate yourself from who you really are, if you split off and forget who you really are, you're perceiving the most powerful force in the universe, which is your mind, as if it were weak, because you do not believe you're part of it. You don't believe you're part of the most powerful force in the universe. All right? You don't believe it. All right? So you're perceiving the mind as weak. And perceived without your part in it, God's creation is seen as weak. And those who see themselves as weakened do attack. The attack must be blind, however, because there's nothing to attack. Therefore, they make up images, perceive them as unworthy, and attack them for their unworthiness. This is all the world of the ego is. All right? Let me take a sip and we'll reinforce that. He's describing our entire world, our entire experience in this universe. All right? Because if we're denying that we are part of this powerful mind, we're perceiving ourselves as weak. And because we perceive ourselves as weak, we attack. Okay? I always use the example of a little chihuahua. All right? I sometimes refer to myself as a chihuahua. All right? Because the chihuahua is little, small. Anything that comes near it, it starts barking. Right. And it's barking as if, well, I'm going to get you, you know what I mean? I'm going to bite you. Right? And what the Chihuahua is really saying is, hey, stay away from me, I'm afraid, leave me alone. You're bigger than me. All right? But what Jesus is telling us here, it says those who perceive themselves as weakened, they do attack. He says, but the attack has to be blind. Because there's nothing out there to attack. All right? It's an illusion. It's a hallucination. All right? But there's nothing out there. Therefore, they make up images, perceive them as unworthy, and attack them for their unworthiness. You know, in one of my classes some years ago, I said, look, if you were in a cave, in some Zen practices, part of the practice is to spend some period of time in a cave, right? And, basically they bring you your food and that's it. But I said, if you were in that cave, you'd start making stuff up. You'd start hallucinating things to project onto. Okay? You would. I mean, it's far afield, but that's why I can totally see the case against solitary confinement. That's a cruel punishment, because people will do that. They'll start making things up. Okay? And he says, that's what you guys are doing, Jesus says. That's what you're all doing. All right? There's nothing out there. He says, you're making it all up just so you can attack something, because you think you're weak. Right? You've denied the fact that you are part of the oneness. It all comes back to the one problem. The one solution is to get back to the oneness. Right? This is all the world of the ego is. Right? It makes stuff up. Right? It's all the world of the ego is. It's nothing. It has no meaning. It does not exist. All right? Little sentence. The world of the ego, it does not exist. Do not try to understand it, because if you do, you are believing that it can be understood and is therefore capable of being appreciated and loved. That would justify its existence, which cannot be justified. You cannot make the meaningless meaningful. This can only be an insane attempt. Right? He's telling us that our attempt to make this world meaningful is insane. Okay? And with Ken's caveats is to be normal. Right? We do this little by little. Okay? We just start where we are. Right? And we bring all the scraps of fear, all the things we have to attack. Right? We bring them to our right mind. And say, help me to see this correctly, all right? And we process ourselves out, all right, in a manner of speaking, okay? All right. This is all the world of the ego is. Nothing. It has no meaning. It does not exist. Do not try to understand it, because if you do, you're believing it can be understood, and therefore capable of being appreciated and loved. All right. This would justify its existence, which cannot be justified. You cannot make the meaningless meaningful. This can only be an insane attempt. That's why Ken would always say the ego loves to study itself. All right? And that's how clever the ego is. We could spend years studying our egos. The ego will do that just to preserve itself, all right? So be vigilant for when the ego is pulling you back in, right? Like Michael Corleone. Paragraph 12. Allowing insanity to enter your mind means that you have not judged sanity as wholly desirable. If you want something else, you will make something else. But because it is something else, it will attack your thought system and divide your allegiance. All right? You cannot create in this divided state. And you must be vigilant against this divided state, because only peace can be extended. Your divided mind is blocking the extension of the kingdom, and its extension is your joy. Right? So your divided mind is blocking your joy. If you do not extend the kingdom, you are not thinking with your Creator and creating as He created. Right? So he says, look, allowing insanity into the mind is that you have judged sanity as not being totally desirable. Right? If you want something else, he goes, you'll make something else. All right? But because it is something else, it will attack your thought system and divide your allegiance. All right? It'll make you off balance. It'll attack who you truly are. Right? It'll make you doubt who you truly are. All right? And he says in that state, he says you can't be creative. All right? In other words, you can't extend totality. You can't extend love in a divided, mixed up state, a divided, mixed up frame of mind. All right? So you have to be vigilant for when the ego is pulling you back. All right? Because only peace can be extended. And that's what you want. You want to extend peace, because that's where your true joy is. Right? And you can experience it. Right? And little by little, those little momentary experiences, you will desire them more and more, and you will reinforce that until you're spending your time in the right mind, right? And then you realize, why would I want to go back and put on those dirty clothes? This is so much more peaceful and comfortable and joyous, right? That's the processing out, all right? So, and when he tells us that we're in this divided state, he says, in this depressing state, the Holy Spirit reminds you gently that you are sad because you're not fulfilling your function as a co-creator with God, and therefore depriving yourself of joy. This is not God's choice, but yours. All right? And don't blame yourself for it either. Just realize, oh, I made a silly choice. Can you help me? Help me to come back to peace. All right? Because he says the Holy Spirit reminds you gently that you're sad because you're not fulfilling your function as a co-creator. You're not extending love. That's why you're sad. Right? This is not God's choice, but yours. If your mind could be out of accord with God's, you would be willing without meaning. Right? If, in fact, you could be out of accord with God's mind, he says, then you're willing things, you're making things without meaning. You're wandering around meaningless. Yet because God's will is unchangeable, right? Because you can't really do that. You can't really leave the mind of God. And God's will is unchangeable, and God's will for you is happiness. All right? Because God's will is unchangeable, no conflict of will is possible. This is the Holy Spirit's perfectly consistent teaching. Creation, not separation, is your will because it is God's. And nothing that opposes this means anything at all. Being a perfect accomplishment, the sonship can only accomplish perfectly, extending the joy in which it was created, and identifying itself with both its creator and its creations, knowing that they are one. Right? So in other words, he says, hey, believe what you want, but what's true is that you are a co-creator with God. All right? And you might believe that you're here in this dream, in this world. He says, but you're not. It doesn't exist. Right? You are at home in God, dreaming of exile. And he says, and while you're dreaming of exile, you're blocking your awareness of joy. Right? You're blocking your own awareness of joy. A joy that's indescribable. That peace that passes all understanding, as the old scriptures say. Right? That's what we're talking about here. That's who you are. You are that peace that passes understanding, that can't be described. You are the indescribable, right? But as long as you're not aware of that, as long as you're believing you're something else, you're blocking the awareness of that. So he says, so be vigilant for when the ego thought system is trying to convince you that you are not indescribable joy. When the ego has convinced you, that's when you go back to your mind and say, show me who I am, please. Show me who I am. I want to remember. I want to be peaceful. All right? And you're on the road. All right? Okay then. So, message me. Say hello. All right? And once again, I'd like to remind people to get all of Dr. Kenneth Wapnick's teachings, you can go to the Foundation for A Course in Miracles. It's all lowercase, facim.org. And it's really cool. The website is just getting better. You can live stream, you can stream videos, which means you don't have to load up your computer with bits. All right? All righty then. So we're all on the road. We'll see you on the road. All right? Happy trails. Love you. See you next time.